In those days, Saul went down to the desert of Ziph with 3,000 picked men of Israel to search for David in the desert of Ziph. So David and Abishai went among Saul's soldiers by night and found Saul lying asleep within the barricade, with his spear thrust into the ground at his head, and Abner and his men sleeping around him. Abishai whispered to David, "God has delivered your enemy into your grasp this day. Let me nail him to the ground with one thrust of the spear. I will not need a second thrust." But David said to Abishai, "Do not harm him, for who can lay hands on the Lord's anointed and remain untouched?" So David took the spear and the water jug from their place at Saul's head, and they got away without anyone seeing or knowing or awakening. All remained asleep because the Lord had put them into a deep slumber. Going across to the opposite slope, David stood on a remote hilltop at a great distance from Abner, son of Ner, and the troops. He said, "Here is the king's spear. Let an attendant come over to get it. The Lord will reward each man for his justice and faithfulness. Today, though the Lord delivered you into my grasp, I would not harm the Lord's anointed." The word of the Lord.
Our responsorial will be 2 verses of number 665, loving and forgiving.
Loving and forgiving are you, O Lord, slow to anger, rich in kindness, loving and forgiving are you. Loving and forgiving are you, O Lord, slow to anger, rich in kindness, loving and forgiving are you.
A reading from the first letter of St. Paul to the Corinthians. Brothers and sisters, it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam, a life-giving spirit. But the spiritual was not first, rather the natural, and then the spiritual. The first man was from the earth, earthly. The second man from heaven. As was the earthly one, so also are the earthly. And as is the heavenly one, so also are the heavenly. Just as we have borne the image of the earthly one, we shall also bear the image of the heavenly one. The word of the Lord.
Jesus said to his disciples, "To you who hear I say, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. To the person who strikes you on one cheek, offer the other one as well, and from the person who takes your cloak, do not withhold even your tunic. Give to everyone who asks of you, and from the one who takes what is yours, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. For if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do the same. And if you lend money to those to whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners and get back the same amount. But rather, love your enemies and do good to them, and lend expecting nothing back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, for he himself is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Stop judging, and you will not be judged. Stop condemning, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and gifts will be given to you. A good measure, packed together, shaken down, and overflowing, will be poured into your lap. For the measure with which you measure will in turn be measured out to you. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord.
For Freud, the command to love one's enemies belongs to credo quia absurdum est. I believe because it is absurd. Jesus' command to love one's enemies is so radical that it can take your breath away, yet this teaching is as central as it is radical. Radical in that it requires us to be as merciful, as perfect as the Father, and central in that you just can't get away from it. This teaching is found at every turn. Add to the litany of teachings offered in today's Gospel, the Our Fathers, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. That Jesus taught us that we should offer forgiveness not only once, not even 7 times, but 77 times, that is, without limit. That Jesus illustrated this demand in the parable of the unforgiving servant, the parable of the prodigal son, the parable of the lost coin and the lost servant. That Jesus offers his forgiveness from the cross. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. The deacon and martyr Stephen expressed the same plea as he was being stoned and dying. Paul, in Romans 3, Romans 5, Colossians 3, and Ephesians 4, call us to model Jesus' necessity to forgive, and a long list of church fathers who wrote on the necessity to forgive, from Clement to Ambrose, from Augustine to Aquinas, just to name a few. As God would have it, this past Thursday, February 21st, the church celebrated the feast of St. Peter Damian. And the breviary has this to say about Peter Damian, who lived 1,000 years ago. During calamitous times, he helped the Roman pontiffs through his works and writings and by various missions on behalf of church reform. Well, since the church is going through some calamitous times and is in need of reform right now, I Googled what Peter Damian worked and wrote about. Peter Damian wrote and worked about the sexual abuse of minors and prepubescents by the clergy 1,000 years ago. How timely. In his correspondence with the Holy See, Peter Damian asked another future saint, then Pope Leo IX, 4 questions. Is one who is found guilty of these crimes to be expelled irrevocably from holy orders? Today, the answer would be defract, meaning that he would never again be able to act or present himself as a priest. Laicized, to be determined. You will remember from your Baltimore Catechism or from your confirmation questions that there are 3 sacraments that come with a sacramental mark, that is, a character that is indelible on your soul, and they are baptism, confirmation, and holy orders. So while there is nothing one can do to make one unbaptized or unconfirmed, one is not necessarily unordained unless he is laicized. 2. Whether at a prelate's discretion one might mercifully be allowed to function in office. Today the answer would be no. 3rd, to what extent, both in respect to the methods mentioned above and to the number of lapses, is it permissible to retain a man in the dignity of ecclesiastical office? Today the answer would be none. Also, 4th, if one is guilty, what degree and what frequency of guilt should compel him under the circumstances to retire? Today the answer would be once. It appears that whenever Holy Mother Church has a great need for a special kind of saint for a particular age, that God in his infinite mercy has never failed us to fill us that need. And I have no reason to think that God will fail us now. However, until that saint is identified, and he may already be known among us, we need to rely on gospel values as taught by Jesus. If Jesus' teaching on forgiveness is absurd, as Freud claims it is, we can counter this claim with the question, where do we get if there is no pardon and no forgiveness? When we repay every wrong wrong done to us with a new wrong, taking an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, or in the current crisis, castration. Taking all the horrific atrocities that we have experienced over the centuries, the problem of forgiveness and love of enemy has required a sad new currency and has led to a much-needed rethinking. And after thinking this through, it has become abundantly clear that however much mercy, forgiveness, and pardon are superhuman, supernatural acts, and even absurd to some, they are nonetheless highly sensible in the end. To act as if it, whatever it may be, a victim in the current crisis, whatever, to act as if it never happened, or to act as if it never hurt, that would be absurd. Some of us have been truly hurt and deeply hurt by others, and likewise, some of us have truly hurt and deeply hurt others. So let's talk about loving from a distance, forgiving from a distance. To forgive someone doesn't mean to pretend that it didn't hurt, or to return to a state that they could hurt us again, especially if they don't know how deeply they've hurt us in the first place. How many times have I heard it said, "Father, I've tried to explain it to them, and they just don't get it." Well, all right. To forgive in those circumstances can simply be boiled down to this. To say about the one who has deeply hurt me, he doesn't owe me anything anymore. Not even an apology. I don't need an apology to forgive him. It would be nice, but I don't need it. Because this does not even require that they get it, or that you get the last word, which you won't. It doesn't even require that there be a confrontation. All it requires is you admitting to yourself that they don't owe you anything. It requires that you forgive from a distance. And the only way you'll be able to say that and mean it is by God's grace. I have spoken to victims in the current crisis, and I have asked them, what can I say to you, either here, one-on-one, or from the pulpit, to help you heal? And she said, there's nothing you can say. Just pray for us victims. So my prayer for victims is huge. My prayer for those who have a huge grudge is, I pray that someday they will forgive. There are few things in life more difficult than forgiving someone who has really hurt us. And yet, God's grace from the Eucharist is the grace that is able to do just that, to forgive. And it is extremely freeing when we do. This particular grace is what you and I are about to receive when we walk down these aisles and receive the precious body and blood of Jesus from this altar. The new and eternal covenant for the forgiveness of sins. That's why we receive the Eucharist, for the forgiveness of sins, to receive grace to forgive sins. You do this to remember me. When you forgive sins, you remember me. When you remember that I have forgiven your sins. And it is this grace that can take a credo quia absurdum est. I believe because it is absurd. To credo quae rationabile. I believe because it is sensible.